Listen. If you haven't seen this fantastic documentary on Mr. Rogers, I highly recommend it. It's even one of our favorite LME edits. I've talked about how influential Mr. Rogers was for me growing up, that I had myself 3 good cardigans ready to go at all times. But as biased as I may come off for the show, I was really skeptical when I heard they were going to be making a movie. See, Jim Carrey's kidding show, that's one thing. But someone trying to embody Rogers himself, I just couldn't see it. I couldn't fathom.
Please won't you be my neighbor?
Oh, well, okay. On top of that, they got Marielle Heller, who already has 2 great features under her belt. They got the approval of the Rogers estate. Mrs. Rogers even gave Hank all of Fred's actual ties for the movie. And wouldn't you know it, Miss Joanne Rogers let them know that Hanks was, in fact, Mr. Rogers' favorite actor.
I think that Fred saw, was it Forrest Gump, in the movie theater 40 times. She said Tom Hanks was his favorite actor. He loved him so much, and it had all come from Big. He had loved Big and thought you really got the essence of childhood right.
And I'll say this, Marielle Heller better get nominated for directing, because if she's not, I'm not lying, I'm not covering the Oscars. Because when I caught this at TIFF, I came out thinking, did Marielle Heller really just recreate a feature-length episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? And then I heard,
We filmed on these Ikegami cameras, these tube cameras that were just like the original cameras they filmed the real program on. We had a live feed going to these monitors, and then we were filming on a digital Alexa camera.
So, turns out she did. Let me explain. So the story is based on Tom Junode's Esquire piece on Mr. Rogers that came out in 1998, but the movie itself swaps Tom for the fictional journalist Lloyd Vogel, who in the first 15 minutes of the Mr. Rogers feature film, gets into a fistfight with his father.
Is this a joke to you?
That's when I knew we actually had a movie though, because see, when it comes to Mr. Rogers, I think a lot of people would like to see him as soft or very quiet, but his show always covered things darker than Lloyd's right eye.
What does assassination mean?
So with Lloyd being the main character of the movie, it technically makes Hank's portrayal of Fred a supporting role, which, supporting, that's just like Mr. Rogers. What's crazy is that Hanks originally passed on the role until Heller convinced him to do it, proving even further that she's a master at her craft to the point that she's directing actors before the shoot even starts.
Oh, I just read this interesting article in the New York Times about female directors. Have you seen it? And she looked at me and she said, I'm in it. I said, please let me remove my shoe from my mouth.
One of the things that's always motivated me, besides the kindness of Mr. Rogers and everything that he showed through his work and his everyday life, are the people who hated his work and his everyday life. Realizing people are always going to hate, just to hate, even in the case of someone like Mr. Rogers, I think that's an extremely important lesson and something that'll take so much weight off of your shoulders. Fred embracing those people though, yo, that's a saint.
Nobody from Fred's camp of people likes it when we refer to him as a saint. And it was sort of the first thing people would say is, oh man, he was a saint. And she was the one who really said, if you think of him as a saint, he's not accessible. It's something that we can't attain if we're viewing him as a saint. And you need to know he wasn't. He was a person.
I know, but come on. The Rogers estate never sold any merch. So them opening up the archives for the writers of this movie, allowing them to go through every single letter to make a better picture, that's a big deal. They remade the trolleys from the original set and had them running all throughout production. They shot it in Pittsburgh, in that same studio, with the same cameras, and got down every little detail from hand-knit sweaters to the buttons on the puppets, and then turned it into a feature-length episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood for adults. And even with any creative liberties, they had constant back and forth with Mrs. Rogers, and really the city of Pittsburgh.
I was going up in the elevator one day, and all of Pittsburgh knows you're there shooting a movie, and everybody's very cool about it. And just as the elevator was he got out before me, just as the elevator was closing, he said to me, we take Mr. Rogers very seriously here in Pittsburgh. And the door closed. It was like, that was a veiled threat.
Yeah.
Again, it's fictional, so no, Mr. Rogers didn't visit someone with a pie in their deathbed, at least that we know of, but Fred asking the father to pray for him was actually based on real Fred's visit with a boy with cerebral palsy, who he felt must be very close to God, and he always sought out that innocence, regardless of the person's background. Every interview within the movie feels like a therapy session that Lloyd finds himself in 3 questions too late. Heller's able to capture every single character's emotion within a scene, regardless of how packed it is. Like, she just knows how to convey everybody's headspace, something she did incredibly well in Diary of a Teenage Girl, and now she's directed a pretty much universally beloved movie on one of the most universally beloved beings.
My secret is Tom Hanks didn't actually know that I was focusing on him for this scene. He thought we were really just focusing on Daniel Tiger and Lady Aberlin and the scene as it was being captured for the program.
Heller also fought for French Hour Days, which pretty much is a schedule that allows the crew to be able to see their families, which if you've ever worked on a production, man, that's not a hassle. It's obsolete. Nolan's practically made every one of his movies as a love letter to not being there for his kids.
Shooting shorter hours where you don't take a lunch break and you push through and you shoot the entire day. For me as a parent, that makes this life more sustainable, and I believe it's one way to get more women behind the camera is if we don't have these totally unsustainable lives where we work 16 to 18-hour days.
Overall, I think the reason it works is simple. They cared. So many times we see biopics that try to overly glorify the subject or make them an icon or drag them down, but just like with the documentary and with his own show, Mr. Rogers has always been about paying it forward. He was always less concerned about being the hero than he was making sure you had a hero guiding you, your mom, your dad, a sibling or a teacher, anyone who can make your day beautiful.
If someone comes into the office to talk to the minister, they're not to talk about him. They're coming in to talk about themselves. And that's what he was always able to get somebody to do, to talk about themselves.
It was always the idea that a neighborhood looks out for each other and cares for each other. Hanks, who's been on our screens for decades, recognized that and somehow transformed even further for this role. The way they filmed on location and embraced the beautiful city that is Pittsburgh. And Heller's set in general embodied that neighborhood Rogers always talked about.
When I made this movie, I said Fred Rogers would have never wanted us to make a movie about him where we had to abandon our children in order to make this movie. So let's figure out another way.
So to come at it from the angle of a cynical journalist, of a father-to-be who feels beat down, that was just perfect because he too belongs in the neighborhood. See it as a message of forgiveness, see it as an awareness of kindness, or just a good movie. In the end, I felt it embodied Rogers' quote that anything that's mentionable is also manageable. Thank you guys for checking out this video, and I'm curious to know your thoughts down below in the comment section. You know what they say, only greats can play the greats.
And I entered the shot from the end of the street with a submachine gun, and I butchered 12 guys and shot Paul Newman dead. And I thought, God, I hope I get to play Mr. Rogers someday.
I'm curious to know your thoughts about this movie down below in the comment section. Please watch the documentary if you haven't. I hope you really enjoy that one. It's one of our favorite documentaries of that year, specifically just because he was such an interesting dude. Like, Fred responded to every letter he ever received. That's insane to me, and that's why you got reactions like this.
It's amazing what they were comfortable sharing with Fred. What do you think about this? How can I deal with this? And Fred did respond to every letter that came in.
It's very rare that you get people like that, you know? Like, I think of Bob Ross, I think of Mr. Rogers. Like, you don't know who is that today, you know? But other than that, I'm curious to know your thoughts, what resonated for you in the movie. Let me know your heroes. And until next time, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. And protect Review Bra at all times.